like to put your name, where you're to us from today in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. We'll also be using the chat for Q&A portion later in the hour. So feel free to put any questions you have in there, and we'll go from there. And again, we're really thrilled to have you all here, recognizing that today is a day like no other. We weren't expecting these to be the circumstances that we were meeting in today, but we're really glad that you're all here and excited to share our legislative priorities coming up. All right. So we're just past the top of the hour. I'll get started. I'm Tamara Schuhendler. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the community organizer at Washington Bikes. Like I said, before we get started, I really just want to call out and acknowledge that we're living in a very scary, heavy, and historic moment, and I recognize that things are not business as usual, to say the very least. But I want to note that we still have to show up for each other, care for each other and our communities as we go forward, and we are going to continue standing up for our communities, for our BIPOC neighbors, and for the initiatives and causes that we care about. So with that, I want to welcome you all to our first ever Legislative Lunch and Learn for the 2021 Washington State Legislative Session, and I hope that this can serve not only as an informative session for all of you around our priorities, but also as a place of calm and peace and community. So, for those of you who might be new to the Washington Bikes community, a little bit of background. Washington Bikes and Cascade Bicycle Club are two sister organizations working towards a shared vision of bicycling for all. Washington Bikes advocates for bicyclist rights, endorses political candidates, holds officials accountable, and works to shape policies that will make biking safe and accessible for all. And before we dive in, we'd like to start with a land acknowledgement as well. This event is virtual, but it is rooted on Duwamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish land. We acknowledge the land that we sit on and occupy today as the traditional home of the Duwamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish tribal nations. Without them, we would not have access to this environment, and we take the opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. We'd also like to note that we are recording today's session, and it will be available after the session today. Also, before we dive in with our State Policy Director, Alex Alston, I want to go over our community norms. These are the norms that we have for all of our virtual and in-person events. And I want to recognize that today it might be a little more difficult to be fully present in this session, but I'm hoping that you all can take the space and time that you need to care for yourselves. Other than that, we will maintain a standard of conduct to ensure that all participants feel safe and respected. We believe that every person has the right to be treated with dignity and respect and to be free from all forms of harassment. So we ask that today, as much as you can, be present in this session, be self-responsible and self-challenging, listen and process the information you're hearing, suspend judgment of yourself and others, and use respectful language towards each other in the panel. So before I hand it off to Alex, I want to say again, we're really thrilled to have you all here. It's the first time we have shared information about session in this way, and we're really excited about where we're starting from this year. This session is like no other. Budget shortfalls, a pandemic, and the inability for legislators to meet in person mean that we're really facing a unique couple months ahead of us. And we're really looking forward to our plan, our priorities, and we're excited for all of you to get involved and help us make Washington a really thriving community and a great place for folks biking, walking, and rolling around the state. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and I will pass it along to Alex Alston.
Thank you, Tamar, and hello and welcome to everyone. Just to jump off of what Tamar was sharing, this is really exciting to be connecting with folks ahead of session like this. We're trying to embrace kind of all of the new that's coming at us right now, and so in a year where our team, we have a contract lobbying team as well, where we can't be on the ground and in Olympia, we're really hoping that your engagement will really bolster our 2021 Ledge Agenda priorities and our efforts. So I'm really excited to be connecting, and would love to hear from you moving forward. I'm excited to hear your questions. The upcoming session, this is a first of its kind, so I'll do my best to answer all the questions, but we haven't quite seen it in action yet. So with that, the other thing I'll say is with everything that's been going on the last couple days, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, and feeling a lot of emotions just about the state of things. So feeling a little scattered. I imagine many of you are as well, but I'm still happy we're gathering here today and ready to talk about the opportunities ahead here in the 2021 legislative session. And before we jump into the state level lay of the land, we thought we'd just do a quick touch on what's happening at the national level. So Washington Bikes doesn't work we don't lobby at the national level, but we do stay connected to there's some federal level bike organizations, and so we plug in when we can. And so the news of the week, which I'm sure you're familiar with the special elections in Georgia, the majority in the Senate has flipped. So I think it's probably good news for conversation around an infrastructure package. The FAST Act did, so that's the funding that comes to states for transportation and for walking and biking and many other modes and things. But it had expired, and they passed an extension. So I believe through September 2021, there's an extension in place, but hopefully there will be more conversation, more work to put in ahead of that deadline to get a multi-year package passed with increases for walking, biking, rolling. And then the other piece of national transportation news that I would just touch on is that we'll have a transition in transportation secretaries. And so with Pete Buttigieg being named, I think it's a really good thing for walking and biking. I think, we can look to his time as mayor of South Bend and also his platform that he was running on for the presidency to know that there will be some good changes there. And so yes, I'm looking forward to that. So I think I'll jump to the state level lay of the land now. So 2021 is the first year of our biennial budget. So we have a 2-year cycle. It's our long year, the 105-day session, where the legislature is tasked with passing an operating, a capital, and a transportation budget. Right now, Democrats control both chambers and the executive. New this year, I think we're heading into the most diverse legislature that Washington State has seen before, which is very, very exciting. I know the House Democratic Caucus added members to their Members of Color Caucus and to their Black Members Caucus. And in the Senate, we have a newly elected or Senator-elect member from the 28th who was a Washington Bikes endorsed candidate, and she will be only the second ever Black woman to serve in the state Senate. And so, and that's been since 10 years since the previous senator had served, and that was Senator Franklin, who I actually interned for once upon a time. So we're very excited to work with Senator Nobles in her new role. And I think in this past year of incredible civil rights protests and demonstrations and commitments being made to Black Lives Matter, I think it's really encouraging that the legislature's makeup is diversifying. So with that, we are also headed into this unprecedented session due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the session will primarily be held virtually. there will be a small number of senators allowed on the Senate floor. For floor action, the House is saying that they will not have members on the floor. I think they have really different space constraints, the two chambers. I mean, there are 98 House members, so that's a lot more people. And apparently when Thurston County Public Health came through, their advice was for a virtual session. So the Capitol will be closed to the public and to lobbyists, which just means we're getting really, really familiar with Zoom and Teams. And, you know, we'll be hoping to have really great connections over the internet like we're doing right now. That's the broadcast channel that regularly covers Olympia action. I think that station and their work is feeling more important than ever right now. And we will get to some of the logistics around committee and kind of the new access that we'll have through this next session. So I will say there is still some tension about how this legislative session is being carried out, especially from the Republican side. I think folks were hoping for more of a mix of in-person and virtual, and so that's just something that's there. We know that there have been some commitments to show up and protest because of the virtual session, and that is giving me an uneasy feeling given these recent events of yesterday in our nation's capital. And so that's just something to keep in mind. I was really mourning the fact that we weren't going to be in person for session, but with what we're seeing play out with these, I mean, they're not really protests, right? I'm feeling kind of grateful that will be virtual this year, just with this political climate. So I think I'm seeing questions pop in here. That's great, thank you. I'm gonna keep going through kind of our high level and our priorities, and then we'll jump into questions after that. So looking at what the legislature faces this year, our operating budget does have a deficit. It's not as bad as was forecasted back in 2020, but it's still significant. I believe $3 to $4 billion that will need to be identified. We've heard from budget leaders and leadership that they're not interested in a cuts budget, and that when our state moved forward with the cuts budget during the Great Recession, that it was actually more harmful to our state's recovery. Moving forward and climbing out of that. And so there will be just some creative thinking needed, and also discussion of progressive revenue. And so I think in terms of the priorities that we know that have been stated will be worked on coming up, there will definitely be COVID related bills of things that just need to address changes to how we do things because of the impacts of the pandemic. With federal stimulus money coming, the legislature has a role in appropriating out that funding. And so that's anything from vaccine distribution and contact tracing to rental assistance, childcare assistance, business assistance, and kind of food insecurity, addressing all of the things that have been completely upended due to COVID. And so we know there are K-12 issues just due to how tight the funding formulas are, and then everything being turned upside down with kids not in buildings and not being transported to school. And then there's considerable interest in police reform and accountability. And so it's a lot of really important things, and less time to do it in, just because of this transition to an all virtual mode of session. So I think it's going to be an exciting one, and I'm sure really important work is going to happen, even though it'll be an educational year for sure, as we all navigate this. So I think we can move into some of the logistics. I think there's some links that we'll be sharing out. The legislative staff has been sharing, how to engage with the legislature in this remote setting. And so there's kind of tutorials that are being shared about accessing committee, testifying. Committee schedules come out on Wednesdays. And so the first ones that have came out yesterday, and the portal for signing in support of a bill it's already open. And so all of these processes this is all new. It didn't used to be that you could sign in support of a bill from somewhere else. You had to be on campus in Olympia. And then the other new thing that I think is exciting is that there's now a way to submit written testimony. And so, you could get exceptions to do that. Certainly, I remember having people who were supposed to come testify who couldn't make it over a pass because it's winter. And, committee staff and members said, go ahead and have them submit written testimony, but it definitely wasn't the norm. So I do think this is exciting that more voices will be able to be on the record in support or against policy that's being considered. And so there's a lot different there. And I think, we keep hearing there's going to be so much more access. This is going to be so much better in terms of engagement of citizens in the work of the legislature. I believe that to be true as well. I think there's going to be a tension with this is going to take a lot longer to do the work this way. And in order to even fit in all of the hearings and address all of the scheduling, they've shortened some of the committees in the House. And so I just know time will be a challenge as we try and get all of this work addressed. And I think both chambers will be prioritizing legislators who have connectivity issues when they're thinking about who would be in Olympia and on the ground there. One other item that is new this year is in order to kind of narrow in on what sorry, I was just reading comments on what, I lost my train of thought. Narrow in on the bills that are going to be worked on. The House has put out kind of guidelines for what bills should be about. And this has definitely been something we've been keeping in mind when we thought about putting our legislative agenda together. So in the House, they've been asked to only introduce 7 pieces of policy, and they've been asked to have the bills be related to areas of either advancing racial equity, addressing the COVID response, addressing economic recovery, or the global climate crisis. And so I think that definitely weeds out a lot of priorities. They're hoping to not have companion bills so that if a bill is introduced, it would only be in one chamber in either the House or the Senate, which would definitely cut down in time. Usually we prepare for hearings in both chambers. And in the Senate, same thing. They've got kind of topic areas that will be prioritized by their leadership, and that's for budget priorities as well. And so they have an equity framework that they're moving forward. And they've asked their committee chairs to actually reduce the amount of bills that they're moving by 50%. So this year, this will be unique for sure. So I think we can move to the transportation budget now. And I am sure many of you are aware that with the state Supreme Court ruling in October that Initiative 976 was unconstitutional, we have a really different transportation budget landscape than we thought we might at the end of the 2020 legislative session. So, the OFM staff had forecasted a $4 billion loss in tax revenue. had I-976 been upheld. And that's through 2025, but that was projects around the state that would have been impacted, and certainly many of the spending that comes from the multimodal account, which is where it's where our funding for bike and pedestrian infrastructure comes from. So we're excited that we instead get to focus on talking about new needs and the increased demand of walking and biking versus playing this aggressive defense to not see cuts. So I will talk a bit about the transportation revenue package conversations. I mean, this will be the bulk of our, not the bulk, I guess, but this is the main focus of what our 2021 legislative agenda is going to aim to do. And we're really interested in increasing investments made for people to be able to bike and walk around their communities. And in 2015, when the transportation revenue package was passed, that there was actually historic levels of investments for biking and walking. Washington Bikes was a part of that work, and that was before my time. But now 5 years have passed, and we're living in a global pandemic, and so much has changed around how people are using our streets and our trail systems. And so in Washington State, we've seen a dramatic increase in walking and biking, and we know that due to the to our state Department of Transportation's counters. And we also know this to be true just with being aware of the bike boom that we're living in. It was nearly impossible to find bikes for my girls for Christmas. And so with this increase in walking and biking, we're also really aware that the injury and fatality crash data are actually on track to surpass last year's outcomes. And so that's definitely concerning. And we feel really motivated to tell the story of, people want to be out active in their communities, and they need to be safe and have accessible facilities and trail systems and safe streets to be able to do that on. And so we think there's also a story to tell. Like there's increased mode shift right now to walking and biking during the pandemic, and we will come out of this at some point. But we know too that when you build safe spaces for people to be walking and biking, that more people will choose to do so. So we're really hoping to capture some of this mode shift and have it actually remain even post-pandemic. And so are very excited to be sharing those messages with legislators this session. And so the other piece of this is that we have two very successful grant programs that build infrastructure for biking and walking and improve safety for really all modes. The Safe Routes to School grant program is one of those, and so that's projects that are within 2 miles of a school zone, and then the bike and pedestrian grant program. And so and these are wildly successful. I mean, I think when the bike and pedestrian grant projects go in, we see a 55% decrease in traffic crashes involving people on bike or on foot. And so we know they're successful, and we know that there's significant demand. So in the last biennium, the 2019-2021 biennium, there was $187 million requested for projects, and WashDOT was able to fund 41 million. So we're really interested in seeing more projects be funded, as well as leveraging the work of our active transportation division at WashDOT, who have been working very hard on an active transportation plan update. And so there's new analysis of Washington State's network for biking and walking that we are hoping to see new funding go towards in terms of addressing places where there's gaps and historic underinvestment. And also there's been an equity analysis as part of that work that we are very interested in seeing help prioritize how we fund projects. And I think, so I'm happy to talk about what's happening with the transportation revenue projects. I wanted to check the time real quick. Okay, I've got a few more minutes. So Senator Hobbs has introduced his Forward Washington package for a couple of years now. I think we first saw that in 2019, and then he brought it back again in 2020. And he's now saying that he's doing some rewriting to it. That package held our funding levels for biking and walking at the levels that the 2015 package funded, and but it also includes a tax on new bicycles, which we are not in support of, have testified to that fact, but we'll also work actively against having that be one of the revenue sources. And then we know, so one of the vice chairs on the Transportation Committee in the Senate, Senator Saldana, she has also put together a proposal and a balance sheet regarding new transportation funding. I just read that Senator King will also be putting forth a new proposal, and he's the author of, he was chair when the 2015 proposal was passed, and so in the Senate, there's going to be a lot of work cut out for us. They have identified Senator Leas, Senator Mullet, and Senator Carlisle and Senator Saldana as the negotiators, the senators who will be tasked with working on this proposal. So if any of those are your senators, I'll probably be reaching out to you at some point because yes, we definitely want to move the Senate proposal to a place that has a little more flexible revenue that can support the multimodal account. Rep. Phi has been, so he is the transportation chair in the House, and he has been working very hard this last half of 2020 to, oh yeah, I'm happy to name those Senate negotiators again. So Senator Mullet, Senator Carlisle, Senator Saldana, and Senator Leas. And Senator Leas is someone who's absolutely one of our champions, and we've worked really closely with him for years. He's been bill sponsors for some of Washington Bike's priorities, and so that's great. But the other members, we'll be wanting constituent voices to help raise our priorities. And so back to the House, Rep. Phi is a newer chair. He decided to do listening sessions. I think he did 90 of them or something absurd. They were 90 minutes long, and he brought with him members of his transportation committee. And it was actually a really, really great opportunity to connect with the members, to share kind of our thoughts and needs and ideas for future transportation funding. He was very much interested in how do we do better to address inequities in our transportation system. He also expressed more interest in having more flexible, sustainable funding for multimodal spending. And so that we're very eager to see what his team has put together. And I think we expect to see that in January. So I'm not exactly sure when, but we will be sharing that news when we have it. And so I think that's the overview of what's happening with transportation revenue conversations right now. That'll be playing out throughout the 105-day session, budget conversations, and then new revenue and packages. They run a different course of, say, when you have policy bills that have to get through a policy cutoff early on in session to stay alive and continue on. So that will be the main focus. The other legislative items that we'll be working on. We will be supporting the WWRP request. That's the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Program. And this is funding in the capital budget. It goes towards things like trail development, recreational fields, parks. It really funds places that make our communities great and allow, space for people to be active and outdoors. And this year they're asking for $140 million. And so we advocate on behalf of this program every 2 years. And I think it was funded at $85 million in the last biennium. And then in Washington Bike's commitment to racial equity and transportation and policing, we are planning to be supportive of some of our partner organizations. There will likely be some transit pieces of policy in this space. I think at a local level, definitely the helmet mandate, the helmet law is coming up. That's not something we'll do at the state legislature, but that definitely falls into this this sphere as well of work that we're going to be stepping into. And I think we'll be doing a lot of education in our meetings this year about this. And then we are really eager, and I touched on this already, to start working on projects that will prioritize equity in terms of how we spend money on transportation for biking and walking, which we've not done in this way before. Lastly, we have an e-bike incentive item on our agenda, and this is something that there have been a number of conversations moving with leaders who are interested in finding an idea here, and there's been a bill the last couple of years that has not been successful yet that would exempt the sales tax for the purchase of e-bikes and e-bike equipment. So I heard it's maybe coming back again, but I think, with the requirements for topic for bills this year, I'm not sure that how viable that will be this year, but we are definitely supportive and we'll be interested in working that as well. I think that brings us through the agenda and priorities. Just being aware of time, there's more I could share, but I'm gonna stop and get to questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Alex.
Yeah.
We have some good questions coming in through the chat. Everyone, feel free to keep asking those questions. The rest of the hour will be devoted to answering those and more discussion. So I'm just going to go through them in order. There are a couple that I think reiterate a little bit of the info you were getting to, but it's good to just refresh folks on that. So the first question comes from Joseph, and it's, how do we learn of hearings and get to quote unquote attend? So how do we sign up to offer comment? So kind of more just about the logistics of being an active participant in a virtual session.
That's a great question. Tamar, do we have the link that has there's one it's the legislature's landing page that has all the detail of how you'd access. But I think I just realized I have a sticker on my hand from my daughter. I think that's a really great question, because this will be something new that we can provide as that, advocacy organization on the ground to really be alerting constituents and supporters of upcoming opportunities. And I don't know if we'll just do that through social, or maybe we'll be emailing more frequently. But I do think that we want your voices participating when there's, bills that we do play a lot of defense at the legislature. So that will be a great opportunity. And we will definitely put together a blog post that also shares all of the links of how you would access and kind of what to expect as well. Because, for security reasons as well, I think once you do sign up, and then if you get selected, you get a separate Zoom link for accessing, just because they have to be able to secure the committee hearings. So there are a lot of steps, but yes, we will Washington Bikes will definitely be sharing more information about that.
Awesome. And then another sort of logistical question is, can you remind us of the size of the overall operating budget? So we know sort of what the numbers that we're talking about as Washington Bikes mean.
Oh yeah, okay. So I think, so for Washington Bikes, so we play in the transportation budget. And when we're talking about these kind of large transportation packages, they're enormous and our funding lines are very small. So the 2015 package was, let's see, it was $16 billion over 16 years spending. And our the biking and walking grant programs got $320 million spread out over 16 years. And so so that works out to roughly 40 million per biennium is how it works out. And I actually failed to mention that the governor's budget was released in mid-December, and he actually did invest an additional 20 million into our grant programs. So an additional 5 million into Safe Routes to School and 15 million into the bike and pedestrian grant program, which was really exciting because we've, been held to these, this amount of spending level since it was negotiated in 2015. So I think moving forward, there's different amounts for the different proposals. So we'll continue to share that. Hobbs initially had been looking at 16 billion over, I forget exactly, I think he's saying the rewrite will be 16 billion over 10 years. So they'll all be a little bit different.
Cool. Our next question comes from Bryce, who is wondering if there have been any rumblings or talk about implementing an income tax in Washington.
I mean, I guess I should say I hear that's needed. There's definitely been talk around capital gains. I think there are a lot of ideas that are floating. I guess the thing that we also keep hearing in conversations is this setting of a virtual legislature makes it a little more challenging to have harder, like really contentious conversations. And so, one of the ways that things eventually get negotiated and done in Olympia is that we're all there and stuck there until we adjourn. And so people are really motivated to get their work done to get out. And this is really a different dynamic with people just dispersed and not in person. And so I haven't seen anything that I guess that I can point to about an income tax.
All right, our next question comes from Joseph, who's saying, thinking about the legislative focus areas that you mentioned, it seems like COVID, economic recovery, and climate are all related and tied up to bikes. So he's wondering what Washington Bikes advice is on that. Is this something that we can leverage during the session, or is perhaps his hope about that misplaced?
Yes, I think absolutely. And I was just going to say, maybe he can clarify a little more. I think I am 100% excited to be able to communicate our messages around what's happened in COVID for modes of walking and biking in communities. So I think, and social distancing, yes, all of those things. And so, yes, I think we're in a really great position to see some of our priorities move. And that's why I say the question mark about the e-bike bill as well, is that, that does fit under climate. And so I'm not exactly sure, how tight, we kind of need session to start and see how things go. If it's bumpier than we're expecting, if it takes longer than we're expecting, there's a scenario where the legislature could just get the budgets passed and then get out of there and save kind of the challenging things to a later session when we can meet in person. So so yes, I do think we have really great opportunity, and then with the virtual session, I think we get to leverage having more supporters and voices show up. And so it's Washington Bike's job this year to really make sure that we're communicating with supporters and also sharing messages and things that would resonate. And yeah.
So Phil from Yakima is noting that his community doesn't rank high enough to get the bike and pedestrian grants that you were speaking to earlier, and is wondering if there's a way to change the selection criteria. Maybe you could speak to how that works.
That's a great question. I didn't realize that. So, and the criteria is there's a lot there, and I don't have it in front of me. I'm not going to there's actually an equity component there as well. And I'm not sure the answer to that. I'm happy to work with you on that though. And I know one of your legislators is, high ranking in the transportation committee. And so I'd be happy to help kind of navigate finding out some answers there. But I don't know off the top of my head. Oh, Phil's writing.
And then another question from Phil, which is, it looks like the senators negotiating the transportation budget are all Democrats. Are there any Republicans that we work with or that are included in that process?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up. I totally spaced that. Yes, and that was top of mind because I had a meeting with Senator Saldana yesterday and had learned that. And so absolutely, there are Republicans that we work closely with. I don't know how they fit in right now with the negotiations around transportation revenue. I mentioned Senator King. He will have his own ideas and proposals, but he is absolutely key in the Senate. And then as we work in the House, we always work closely. So the ranking member on the House Transportation Committee is Rep. Barkus, and he is he's been a co-sponsor on our bills. He's been really great for Washington Bikes to work with. And another Republican from the House Transportation Committee is Rep. Orcutt, who has been incredibly helpful too over the years. So yes, we'll absolutely be engaged with them as well. I think I was focused on the Ds because that's kind of who we're hearing from the most, as they're the parties in control right now. And so they're sort of setting their intent and agendas.
Cool. So shifting over to a question specifically about the helmet mandate, I'm wondering if you can speak more to the helmet mandate, what the work that we are, getting engaged with looks like, and sort of what the future of that work is.
I do not have those answers right now. I think at this point, so our colleague Vicki Clark has been running point on that. And I think to date, there have been a lot of conversations with partner organizations to figure out, are we going to take this on right now in King County? And so I definitely expect more to come there, but I don't have any updates. I'm sorry. I've been kind of head down focused on state level work right now.
And then we have sort of a related question about equity work that we're thinking of. Alex asks, where and how is Washington Bikes able to support more equitable funding for transportation spending? Perhaps working with Transportation Choices Coalition, other groups like that. Oh, and sorry, not equitable spending for transportation spending, I believe.
Equitable spending. Okay, so not necessarily the revenue. So this is
I
about
believe
just
so.
Okay. Absolutely. And I think Transportation Choices Coalition is one of our partners. When we've been talking about the transportation and policing work, we've been working really closely with TCC as well as FutureWise and Disability Rights Washington. There's a number of other organizations as well who I think are similarly minded in terms of wanting more flexible revenue, and then to see it spent differently for modes that aren't car-centric, I guess. But I don't have specifics necessarily about what their priorities will be. Typically what happens is we'll show up in Olympia and show up online this year, but and then you know, things start moving, and we're in regular conversation and always willing to step in and help with each other's efforts. So I know there will be more there, but I don't have details right now.
And for folks who want a little bit more information on the helmet mandate, we just got a comment in the chat from Ethan, who is part of Central Seattle Greenways, which Vicki Clark has been working with to examine racial inequities in policing in Seattle. And so that's where some of that great information is coming from, and I'm sure there'll be more coming out from there shortly. So the next question that we had is sort of talking about Washington Bikes, how we do our work, and Gary's asking, how does Washington Bikes coordinate its lobbying of the state, counties, and cities? So are there counties besides King County that spend a significant amount of money on bike infrastructure? How does that coordination look like?
Yeah, and so that's a great question and sort of a convoluted answer. So for Washington Bikes advocacy work, we are focused at the state level. And so, you know, that's showing up in Olympia. We've got, so my role is state policy director, and then we have a contract lobbyist as well. We do not do the work of lobbying at the county level or the city level. Even though there's a connection, they are really separate, and, you know, the timelines are really defined for the state legislature. How we, you know, prepare for policy bills and things ahead of session. It's really different than advocacy and lobbying at the local jurisdictions. That being said, our partner organization, Cascade Bicycle Club, has policy experts who have historically had a region that they were responsible for. So Seattle has typically had a policy manager that would do the lobbying. East King County has in the past. And I think some of that is changing. I mean, just how COVID has really impacted every part of society and life. Same for our organization at Washington Bikes and Cascade. And so we have had a change to the makeup of our policy department. And so yes, there is a lot of work to do at the city and county level, especially in a city like Seattle. But we don't have the infrastructure to do on the ground lobbying in all of those communities. So when you're talking about a statewide touch, it would be through Washington Bikes at the state level that work happens. I hope that answers the question. I also just noticed, to clarify on the helmet mandate, that it wasn't clear. We're not pushing a helmet mandate, but talking about removing one. So apologies if that was, if there was confusion there.
Thanks for clarifying that. And then Kimberly had a question saying, I'm wondering if Washington Bikes sees its legislative agenda fitting in with the federal agency for active transportation put out by Rails to Trails and many partner organizations, especially given the news that the Senate has now flipped to Democratic control.
Yeah, we have not worked, I kind of touched on this before, but we haven't worked closely with federal partners in terms of advocacy. I imagine there probably is overlap, but I don't, just because of all of the relationships that you keep to do the work of moving policy along, and at the state legislature are very much located here in the state and across the state, and there's also a lot of them. And so we really do just focus in on our state leg agenda. And so I would be really interested to learn what the work is there, and I'm sure with the opportunities coming at the federal level, we might figure out ways that Washington Bikes can show up in new ways.
Great. And then Mark had a question asking, does the RCO funding have a role in bicycle-related projects?
I'm sorry, sorry, I was just looking at the questions. Can you say that
No,
one more
you're
time,
good.
Tamar?
Does the RCO funding have a role in bicycle-related projects?
Yes, but so we kind of play in two different spaces. So we seek funding and work in the transportation space, but also in the recreation space. And a lot of time when we're talking recreation, we're talking trails that connect to kind of economic development and tourism, and get folks out into more rural areas. And not to say that there's not funding in the transportation budget that does that, but I do think the types of infrastructure are just different and are funded in different places. So the capital budget work that we do is largely the recreational type trails. So the Palouse to Cascades Trail is one of our legacy projects. And so we've regularly advocated on behalf of funding to see that route become complete. And so RCO, we've done a lot of work with, they've done analysis of kind of the economic impact and benefit that bicycling brings to the state. And so we do work with them, but in terms of the spending and projects that we are really advocating for right now and that we see opportunity for coming up, that agency is not the one that carries out that work.
And then our last question up is from Alex, asking whether you can elaborate on how Washington Bikes is leveraging the active transportation equity analysis. Or how
and so far we have the phase 1 of the draft. I wish the timing was a little bit different, just because the transportation revenue proposals are being put together already, and the governor's budget was already released. But that being said, I still think the opportunity to be talking to legislators about this brand new analysis that we have, that it takes into account the equity analysis, also the level of traffic stress, and also just this more holistic view of a complete network for biking and walking. I think all of those for us feel like a new opportunity to kind of engage and educate around the importance there. I think our messaging will be largely, we are interested in addressing and coming up with solutions for the disparities where, when you're looking at the analysis and there are just communities that have absolutely been underinvested in, where people don't have the same opportunities to safely access, getting places by bike and by foot. And so I think when we speak to legislators, there's a lot of them and not all of them are right with us on our issues, but because the benefits of bicycling are so many, we can usually find a connection. So whether it's we're hooking the need to the health benefits or the economic benefits, or the transportation and congestion benefits, I think we are well poised to see a move to use the equity analysis, even though we don't have the complete update to the active transportation plan yet. So I am very excited to incorporate that work, even though it's still new.
Totally. And I missed a couple of questions in the chat, so we have just a few more to get to. Joseph was wondering if the quantity of public input will be limited. So another logistical question of wondering whether the opportunity for remote hearings could result in higher demand, longer hearings, if there might be a quota, something along those lines.
I think so. I think that's a really good question, something that, makes a lot of sense to be mindful of, because you're right. Increased access and interest, probably, because you can do this from anywhere, and then less time. Like we've heard that in order to get all of the legislators signed in, at times it's taking half an hour plus, because they have to be credentialed, because then they have to be voting in this remote scenario. So there's just, it's a lot of process to put all virtual. And so I would assume we will get to a point where probably doing written testimony will be the way that your voice is going to be on the record. And I would also assume that they would take constituents' testimony over lobbyists, but I still don't think they'll be able to hear every single constituent's testimony. So yes, great question. I'm assuming we'll hear more about that once these committees are underway and we see how they work.
And then I think our last question for today comes from Phil, who's wondering if any of the transportation budgets have bill numbers yet.
Senator Hobbs does have a bill number, but because he's reworking it, because it's the one that he's reintroduced, but because he's rewriting it, no, we haven't seen that yet. And then Senator Saldana's it's like a concept paper more. So there's not a bill number there yet either. So no. And then I think we're expecting Rep. 5s in January. So I do not have a bill number to share, but we definitely will begin sharing that info and updating our blog with those proposals as they come.
Awesome. Well, we just have a couple minutes left for our hour, and I want to thank everyone for being here. Alex, thank you for sharing your wisdom with all of us. And I want to thank all of you for being a part of Washington Bikes and the work that we're going to be doing in the next couple of months. We will be having opportunities for folks to get involved, ways for you to share your story, share your testimony. We have a virtual lobby day that will be happening as well. That will be a great way for folks to get in the ear of your legislator, to tell them why these issues matter to you, why we need to make this work happen. I'll be dropping the link to that in the chat right now. But other than that, I just want to thank all of you so much again for being here. Today has been, another wild day in 2021, but we're excited to do this work together.
Thank you.
All right, have a great afternoon, everybody.